Before we begin with the content of this video, I'm going to start off this video with a slightly biased opinion. I think that the .416 caliber hunting cartridges are my favorite big bores. You know, the .416s hit noticeably harder than the .375s, but shoot just as flat, and the recoil really isn't a big step up from the .375s. You know, in my opinion, not only do the .416s bridge the gap between the .375s and the .458s, but in many ways, the .416s outperform them both. You know, if I had to pick one caliber for a full-blown safari, including everything from plains game up to elephant, the .416s would definitely be my first pick. And quite honestly, all of these .416s are fantastic cartridges. You know, I have nothing bad to say about the .416 Ruger, or the .416 Rigby, or the .416 Weatherby, but this video is about my favorite .416 hunting cartridge, the .416 Remington Magnum. There was a huge resurgence of interest in safari hunting in the mid to late 1980s. This was due to several factors, such as a really great economy under the Reagan administration, and the huge popularity of Peter Capstick and his hunting videos that were released in 1986. At the time, there was demand for a cartridge that hit harder than the .375 H&H Magnum, but had less recoil than the .458s. The .416 Rigby was practically a dead cartridge at the time, and the .416 Weatherby and .416 Ruger didn't even exist yet. So in 1988, Remington made the .416 mainstream again by legitimizing the new caliber in the new .416 Remington Magnum cartridge. The .416 Remington Magnum was based off of the .416 Hoffman Wildcat that was popular among custom gun makers in the 70s and early 80s. The goal of the .416 Remington Magnum was to produce .416 Rigby Ballistics in a cartridge that was similar in size to the .375 H&H Magnum. This allowed the .416 Remington Magnum to be chambered in popular Remington 700 rifles. It was initially greeted with positive reviews by many renowned hunters. Frank Barnes, the author of Cartridges of the World, declared the .416 Remington Magnum to be the best factory cartridge to be produced in decades. But soon, some problems developed. Squeezing all that performance into a small case meant that the .416 Remington Magnum operated at higher pressures than the .416 Rigby did. Initially, the only rifles chambered for the new .416 Remington Magnum were Remington 700 rifles. The Model 700 rifles were push-feed designs with tiny, weak extractors, and these extractors sometimes broke or bent in heavy recoiling rifles and left a case stuck in the chamber, which isn't good in a dangerous game hunting situation. So Remington created a great modern-day dangerous game hunting cartridge in the .416 Remington Magnum, but they chambered it in a rifle that was just too damn weak to handle it. Fortunately, other manufacturers and custom gun makers stepped up to the plate and began chambering for the .416 Remington Magnum in highly reliable Mauser-style actions. You know, and the cartridge quickly gained a reputation as an excellent and reliable, flat-shooting, low-recoil killer. In order to save their reputation, Remington stopped producing factory rifles chambered in the .416 Remington Magnum. But Winchester soon stepped up and started chambering their controlled round feed Safari Express rifles in the .416 Remington Magnum. And those Winchester rifles had zero issues feeding and extracting this cartridge. So in the end, it's the Winchester Model 70 that carried the torch for this great cartridge rather than Remington, the company that created it. In fact, the .416 Remington Magnum was so damn impressive that Weatherby quickly developed their own .416 to compete with it. And then later, Ruger further developed their own .416 to compete with it. The .416 Ruger and .416 Weatherby never really took off and were pretty much doomed to linger on obscurity. Strangely and ironically, the .416 Remington Magnum spawned a new interest in the .416 Rigby cartridge. Today, the .416 Rigby is actually much more popular than the .416 Ruger and .416 Weatherby cartridges, which are pretty much almost dead cartridges right now. So the history of the .416 Remington Magnum is that Remington created this great new cartridge, but unfortunately chambered it in a rifle that wasn't up to the task. Then completely stopped making rifles for it. Then Winchester stepped in and made this cartridge wildly popular again. And finally, the great attributes of the .416 Remington Magnum also made the .416 Rigby great again. But as of right now, the .416 Remington Magnum is the most widely used and most popular of all the .416 hunting cartridges. There's several reasons why the .416 Remington Magnum is the most popular of the current .416 hunting cartridges, and I'll discuss those reasons in this next segment. But first, let me clarify that I won't be discussing obscure Wildcat cartridges like the .416 Taylor, .416 Hoffman, .416 Rimmed, and the .416 Dakota, because these Wildcat cartridges aren't really practical or readily available. The ballistics of the original .416 Rigby are considered by many to be almost magical. You know, that combination of ballistics, energy delivered, and acceptable recoil strike that perfect balance for a do-it-all dangerous game rifle. You know, sending a 400 grain bullet out of the muzzle at close to 2,400 feet per second is the perfect recipe for putting down big dangerous critters and also for hunting normal plains game without excessive recoil. The .416 Remington Magnum was developed basically to match .416 Rigby ballistics, but to do it in a regular Magnum-sized case that didn't require a custom extra-large rifle receiver to use. You know, the .416 Rigby was designed to use old cordite propellant rather than modern smokeless powder, so the case is profoundly oversized by today's standards. The .416 Remington Magnum does what the Rigby does, but it does it more efficiently, requiring less powder and uses a common rifle action and bolt. You know, as a result, ammunition for the .416 Remington is significantly cheaper to make than the .416 Rigby, and more rifles are chambered for the .416 Remington Magnum. It's for this reason that I give the edge to the 416 Remington Magnum. Now let's compare the 416 Remington Magnum to the 416 Weatherby Magnum. You know, most hunters see the added 300 feet per second in velocity of the 416 Weatherby as a complete waste, when you're shooting buffalo at 50 yards, and not worth the huge increase in recoil. So the Weatherby is commonly viewed as a solution looking for a problem that doesn't exist. Today, the 416 Weatherby Magnum is all but pretty much a dead cartridge. Hunters who shoot buffalo at 50 yards and plains game at 100 yards really see no value in this Weatherby cartridge at all. So this isn't very popular, even though it is effective. The 416 Ruger is considered to be another solution looking for a problem that doesn't exist. Ruger sought to further condense the 416 cartridge down in length. When you could compare it to a 416 Remington Magnum, they really shrunk this cartridge down in length a lot. They did this by eliminating the belt and basically making the base diameter of this cartridge really fat. But even at this cartridge suffers from a huge case capacity problem. And Hornady, which is basically the only ammo manufacturer making ammunition for this right now, Hornady uses a special secret blend of powders to achieve 416 Remington Magnum velocities. But from my experience, when you try to load for a 416 Ruger yourself with common powders, it's pretty much almost impossible to hit 416 Rigby and Remington velocities without severely compressing loads. And to add insult to injury with this cartridge, you're stuck using a Ruger M77 rifle, which isn't my favorite if you want to shoot this cartridge, because that's the only rifle chambered in it. It's for these reasons that I believe the 416 Remington Magnum is a much better choice than the 416 Ruger. Today, the 416 Ruger is almost a dead cartridge. It's not a bad cartridge. It's just basically an attempt to do something that was already being done. The only competition for the 416 Remington Magnum is the 416 Rigby. The 416 Rigby can be loaded to slightly higher velocities, but at the expense of having a bigger case, a bigger action, and incurring larger ammo expenses. The only advantage I see to the 416 Rigby is nostalgia. Knowing that you're trudging through the Okavango Delta with the same cartridge that Harry Selby carried is a feeling that can't be replicated with the 416 Remington Magnum. So the Rigby definitely has the nostalgia advantage. So the fact that the 416 Remington Magnum has the same ballistics as the Rigby, but is cheaper and easier to load for, has more prolific ammo availability, and has more rifles chambered in it, makes it the most practical of all the 416 hunting cartridges, in my opinion. And I want to dispel a myth about the 416 Remington Magnum. It does not suffer from overpressure issues like a lot of people think it does. Some armchair hunters started a myth about the 416 Remington Magnum having these mythical high pressure issues that can't handle the blistering African heat during a hunt. And I'm here to tell you that old rumor is complete and utter bullshit. First of all, even a hot load of 416 Remington Magnum operates at the same exact pressures as a 270 Winchester. You know, is the 270 Winchester now famous for blowing up in hot weather? No, because guns that shoot it are made to handle the pressures. The same is true for the 416 Remington Magnum. You know, the initial problems with the 416 Remington Magnum were with the Remington 700 rifles not handling the recoil. There was no problem with the ammunition itself or the design of the cartridge. And now I'm going to show you some of the reasons why the Remington 700 design had some problems with real heavy recoiling rounds. First of all, the 700 doesn't even have a real recoil lug. It's basically just a washer, a band sandwiched between the receiver and the barrel. And that's the recoil lug you get with this design. With the Winchester Model 70 Safari, by contrast, you get two recoil lugs. You get this big recoil lug up here, and then you get this main recoil lug that's actually machined as part of the receiver. In actuality, if you want to get technical, since it gets bedded into this flat here, you almost have an extra recoil lug right here machined in. So you got this surface, and this surface right here. But for all intents and purposes, this is a double recoil lug design, and this main recoil lug is actually machined in as part of the receiver. So these are made to handle extreme recoil. Now let's move on to the bolts. You can see here this Model 70 bolt has this just humongous, beefy Mauser style claw extractor right here. And this is gonna, no matter how high a pressures you run, or you know how much the case expands or how dirty the chamber is, this thing is gonna pull the case out of the chamber every time. By contrast, the Remington Model 700 extractor is that tiny little notch inside of there, basically held on by the stamped steel riveted band that goes around it. And you know, this little extractor right here, under a lot of recoil, these have been known to bend or completely break off and leave cartridges stuck in the chamber. You know, on this design right here, I've even seen this little spring-loaded extractor right here. I've seen these, and you know, if you have a dirty bolt or dirty rifle, I've seen these plungers stick down into the bolt face, and you know, they wouldn't even eject cartridges out of the chamber. So, you know, this, you know, even though it's a strong design, because the case head's fully supported right here, the extraction and ejection mechanism on it is very weak compared to what you get out of the Winchester Model 70. So when Winchester developed the Model 70 Safari Express rifles, these were tailor-made to shoot heavy recoiling rounds. You know, Winchester didn't mess around. They built a rifle strong enough to handle it from the get-go. Well, now I'm going to discuss recoil with you. You know, a lot of people think that the 416 Remington Magnum just has this outrageous, huge recoil that'll just lift you off your feet and send you back against the wall, or, you know, send you back 10 feet and you'll land on your ass. Well, that's just not true. I mean, that doesn't even comply with the laws of physics. But what I'm going to do here is a little experiment. Is I'm about to load up some really hot ammunition. I mean, I don't recommend that you do this at home because I know the limitations with my loads and with my rifle. But basically, I'm going to load up a 400 grain Swift A-frame to get pretty close to 2,500 feet per second. And that's basically, you're not going to shoot a load hotter than this in the 416 Remington Magnum. And the reason I'm doing this is just to get the most recoil I can possibly get out of this rifle. I mean, I want this rifle to kick as hard as it's going to kick me. And so I'm loading these up right now, and I'm going to head out to the range, and I'm going to shoot these, and I'm going to shoot them without a pass recoil pad. I'm not going to use a lead sled. I'm just going to fire, you know, about 15, 20 rounds that I load up today, and I'm going to fire them offhand right on my shoulder. And I'm going to prove to you that if this round hurts you, it's you or your rifle. It's either a bad stock design of the rifle you're shooting, or you just have poor technique. So I'm going to show you that right now. So I'm back from the range, and you know, I basically chronoed these rounds out, and they were shooting about 2,485 feet per second with a 400 grain Swift A-frame. And man, is that, I mean, that's cooking. And you know, I could feel the increase in recoil over my normal loads for a 400 grain Swift A-frame, which come in at about 2,375 feet per second, sometimes 2,380 feet per second. So these were 100 feet per second over my normal loads. And you know, luckily I checked the cases, and you know, I wasn't getting any signs of an overpressure situation. But you know, I prefer not to hunt with ammo that hot. But for this experiment, those hot loads, I went out, I shot 15 of them, and I'll tell you what, my shoulder doesn't hurt. I feel fine. I think what you're going to see in the videos when I download this to my computer is that when I shoot those, there wasn't any excessive recoil. I had proper technique, maybe a little push back, but you know, the scope almost didn't get my eye. I almost didn't lose an eye. My shoulder's not broken. So, you know, I'm gonna download those videos, and you'll see the recoil wasn't that bad because I know how to handle a rifle. Yes, I'm shirtless. I didn't do a strip tease for you. I'm just proving that I don't have any bruises or bumps or gouges or anything like that in my shoulder. It's fine. It's fine. 15 shots. And that bruised shoulder you're getting while you shoot your rifle, all that is either A, you're not putting the rifle butt into the pocket of your shoulder perfectly. You have it on your collarbone or somewhere else, or maybe you have a horrible stock design and the toe of the stock is really pointed, and that's just digging in like causing a pressure point. Or what I commonly see with people is they hold the rifle too loosely. You know, they leave a little gap, you know, or they barely put the butt on the pocket of their shoulder, and then when you fire, there's space there, and you know, it bam hits your shoulder really hard. I hold that thing tight into my shoulder. I pull that rifle into me. I hold the foregrip really tight, and when I shoot, there's basically no space. There's no empty space, and there's no looseness between the recoil pad on the butt of the rifle and my shoulder. You know, there's no space in there. I don't take that hit, and that's the key to not getting a bruised shoulder while you shoot these big recoilers. And trust me, I know what some of you are going to say. I have a shoulder injury, this and that. You know what? I'm just here to tell you, I've broken my collarbone on this side. I've dislocated my shoulder a countless number of times, and I've had rotator cuff issues that I had to have fixed. You know, I've been in martial arts basically since I was a teenager. Went from judo to Muay Thai, over to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in my older years. And, you know, I've had some pretty bad shoulder injuries over the years, and I can still shoot these rifles, and there's no pain, there's no bruising. I do it comfortably. And basically what you saw in that video is I have proper technique. I'm holding that rifle tight. Even the foregrip, I'm holding it tight. I'm not letting that muzzle go up in the air. You don't see any of this exaggerated bullshit when I shoot the rifle. Stays pretty level. Bam, back on target, run the bolt. Bam, back on target, run the bolt. Hardly anything, There's a little sharp push on it, but I didn't come anywhere near getting scoped or anything like that. And you saw my shoulder. There's no bruising, no issues. And I highly recommend that if you're not sure if you have the proper shooting technique, check out my video, subscribe to my channel, go to my videos and check out my video titled Shooting a Big Bore Bolt Action Rifle. And I go over a lot of techniques for shooting, for running the bolt, and even for shooting off the bench for your load development or to zero your optics. It's a long video, but it's worth watching if you need to go back and learn some of the fundamentals of shooting a big bore rifle. I find the 416 Remington Magnum to be one of the most accurate and easy to load of all the big bore cartridges. Using quality brass and the right charge of 48.95, I could shoot under 1 MOA without even trying a lot of the time. I shot this group at 100 yards on the lead sled while standing. This is a solid 5-shot group with a 400 grain bullet at 100 yards. In the big bore world, it really doesn't get any better than this, especially shooting while standing up. These were my first 3 shots right here. And if I would have stayed with 3 shots, I would have been looking at, 3/4 MOA. This would have definitely been a sub MOA group, but, from standing position at 100 yards with a 416 Remington Magnum, this is pretty damn good. These are all kill shots right here. In fact, my best 400 grain loads for this have a muzzle velocity of 2,380 feet per second. And, that keeps the muzzle energy well above 5,000 foot-pounds and provides a very manageable load to shoot. And whatever you do, don't discount the 350 grain bullets for the 416 Remington Magnum. The 350 grainers still deliver over 5,000 foot-pounds of energy. They shoot very flat, and they have noticeably softer recoil than the 400 grain bullets. In my opinion, I'd much rather shoot a 350 grain 416 bullet than a 300 grain 375 bullet. So with modern bullets like the TSX and the Swift A-frame, penetration is never an issue with the 350 grainers. So, don't hesitate to give the 350 grain bullets a look, especially, if you're using the 416 Remington Magnum as an all-around rifle for both plains game and for dangerous game. The 350 grainers really make it versatile. When it comes to powders, I found nothing better for the 416 Remington Magnum than the tried and true Hodgdon H4895 powder. This powder is very common, clean, and it's exceptionally temperature stable. So this is a great powder for the 416. Add some good brass and a good Magnum primer to the load, and you basically have all the raw materials you need for a really kick-ass 416 load. And above anything else, be mindful that you're loading full power, big bore, dangerous game loads here. This is no place to push limits, take risks, or cut corners during the reloading process. You got to be consistent and safe. You also need to prep cases for these big, dangerous game loads much more carefully than you would with a medium bore cartridge. You should always full length resize your brass for this cartridge and keep your number of firings on the brass to a minimum. I thoroughly inspect every fired case and never load brass that I hunt with in this cartridge more than a few times. You'll also need to trim your brass to the exact length. Let me repeat that. You need to make sure you trim all of your brass to the exact length every time so your crimp sets up right every time. You'll be putting a good crimp on these cartridges to prevent the bullet from moving under recoil while it's in the magazine. Also, because you'll be loading these really heavy flat-based bullets, a lot of people don't have a lot of experience loading flat-based bullets. But, when you're loading 416 Rigby, 416 Remington Magnum, the 458s, you'll notice that, you're forcing one of these flat bottom bullets into a really thin case neck usually. And that can cause a lot of bulging. So you need to put a really good chamfer inside the necks of these cases. So these flat-based bullets don't wrinkle and crinkle and crush the necks on these. Basically all the 416s and 458s shooting flat-based bullets are going to need a good chamfer. You can see right here, this is a 416 Rigby case I loaded with brand new unused Hornady brass, and I didn't chamfer the inside of that neck, and you could see that bulge that it put in the case neck. So that's why it's important to do really good brass prep with these cartridges. You're not going to probably notice this problem loading your 7mm Remington Magnum or your 6.5 Creedmoor, but when you're shooting dangerous game ammo, most of the bullets are flat-based bullets. And flat-based bullets plus big cartridges with thin neck walls equal wrinkles if you don't chamfer this. Next, let's talk about bullet seating depth. Don't chase the lands with dangerous game ammo like you would for precision ammo. With these rounds, you're going to seat the bullet so you could put a crimp right into that cantilever. Don't worry about bullet jump with these loads. You're not making long distance precision ammunition here. You're making ammo that will reliably feed and hold together under heavy recoil in bad conditions and while you're trying to kill large, deadly animals at close range. You should put a really good, medium heavy crimp on these cartridges, being sure not to distort the bullet during crimping. What I find is that the Lee factory crimp die is the best way to do this, and arguably the only correct way to crimp a dangerous game cartridge at home. Never crimp with your seating die on these. Always buy the Lee factory collet crimper when you load big bore ammo. These collet crimpers from Lee, they give you maximum control over your crimp and are the most consistent crimping method I've ever used or seen. But remember, your crimp is only as consistent as your brass sizing was. So pay attention to your brass prep, both in sizing and in trimming. And if you have a genuine interest in loading, shooting, and hunting with big bore bolt action rifles, I suggest you check out the video on my channel on shooting big bore bolt action rifles. The 416 Remington Magnum has that almost magical formula of sending a 400 grain bullet at close to 2,400 feet per second. And that formula strikes the perfect balance between trajectory, energy, and recoil. It's been hammering dangerous game from Alaska to Zimbabwe for over 30 years now with no breaks in the action. And it's proven to be reliable and very effective in good rifles. There really isn't anything negative to say about this round and how it performs in the field. And I'll be the first to admit it. You know, the 416 Remington Magnum isn't as cool and nostalgic as the 416 Rigby, but because of its availability and efficiency, the 416 Remington Magnum is currently a much more practical cartridge than the Rigby. For your average working man, being able to head to your local gun shop and buy a controlled round feed Winchester Model 70 right off the shelf, chambered in this great cartridge, along with the ammunition for it, is what makes it so damn practical. Well, I hope you enjoyed this review of a truly great cartridge and found the video at least somewhat entertaining for you. And as always, thanks for watching and good hunting.